You're listening to the Dudes and Dads Podcast, a show dedicated to helping men be better dudes and dads by building community through meaningful conversation and storytelling. And now, here are your hosts, Joel DeMott and Andy Lehman.
Hey, welcome back, guys. We are back. It seems like it's been forever since we've released an episode, because we have. It's been quite a while. We missed an episode. I was going out east, and Joel was out west.
The Wild West, man.
So we covered most of the country, but
Yeah.
we didn't get an episode out, and we apologize to you guys. So sorry about that.
We know you've all been just waiting by
Dying.
your podcast platform, just wondering when will they return. Well, wait no longer, my friends. Here we are.
We are here. So, anyways, welcome back. It's been a while. It's good to be back in the studio today. To kick things off today, though, we actually have a voicemail that we'd love to play for you. So, Cody, take it away.
Hey, this is Cody Chaplin, Andy and Joel. Thank you so much for all that you've done with Dudes and Dads podcast. The current one about being the wall for your children really spoke to my heart. And Joel, I think it was your comment about the value of myself is not wrapped up in my children. And I think sometimes I struggle with that a lot because I want them to be good. I want them to be obedient. I want them to love Jesus. And the days where I see them not choosing to love Jesus and not choosing obedience, I take it very personal because I put my value in them. So thank you for taking those blinders off and helping me recognize where I need to repent to my children for putting them in a place that Jesus should only hold.
Well, thanks for calling in, Cody. You can call in, too, if you want to get on the show. Our voicemail number is 574-213-8702, or you can always take that memo app out on your phone, record us a memo, and send it to dudesanddadspodcast@gmail.com.
That's beautiful, Corey. Man, thank you for that so much. We're we're grateful that our message and our conversation is helpful to you, and for all of you that have continued to say thank you, out in public as you see Andy and I, and just engage in that conversation. It's incredibly it helps us keep going.
Yes, it does.
to know that you are out there and you're out there and listening, and we're just we're grateful for all of you guys, honestly, and we're looking to finish this year, this season, bigger, better, and stronger with just keep on improving in the conversations that we're having. And we always love that feedback, again, just to hear from you guys. What would be helpful for us to talk about? Some great, so send us your ideas. As always, we always love to hear from each and every one of you. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Joel, tell us a little bit about the topic we're going to be chatting about tonight.
Oh my goodness, Andy. Well, did we decide on the fancy title, or
I think we stuck with the fancy title.
With the fancy title?
Yeah, we're sticking with that fancy title.
Excellent. Well, hey, tonight, guys, we're talking all about authenticity. We're talking about being real, but we're going to some deeper, some deeper inner spiritual levels tonight that we're going to talk about. Obviously, Andy and I, in case it hasn't come through, and however you've listened, Andy and I are both, we are followers of Jesus. Jesus is, I don't even say he's not number one in our life. The goal is that he is at the center of our lives.
Absolutely.
And because I always remember, I'll never forget sitting back in Bible class way back in the day, and one of the professors is like, "Hey, you put Jesus number one. That's great and all. I know where you're at, but you get to check that off the list and go on to number two. No, it's got to." Christian spirituality is at the center and the core of who we are and affects every aspect. And so we want to have that kind of conversation about being authentic, but being what being an authentic man looks like, being authentic people. And I should say, again, this applies to kind of the spiritual conversation we're having, applies to everybody, but obviously we're all dudes sitting around this table here tonight having this conversation. And we are, again, just so blessed and honored to welcome a guest. Really, I'm going to call him our armchair expert here on the Dudes and Dads podcast show.
That sounds great. So
yeah.
we want to welcome back Sebastiano. You may remember the episode a while ago that he talked about his life. brought him back on this episode. So welcome to the show again.
Thank you. It's great to be here again.
Again, you're the first. He's the first repeat guest, and I don't. Again, we don't have an award for that, but if we did, we give it to him. But let's just go kind of the background of how we kind of said, like, hey, I think this is a conversation worth having on the podcast. So right now, Sebastiano midweek is leading through a conversation on this book, which I'm kind of fascinated by, and I know it's been really helpful to a lot of people. The author Brent Curtis and John Eldridge some years back, and this book has been out for a while, but it's I think it's at least in second edition, if not third.
At least,
yeah. But the book is entitled "The Sacred Romance: Drawing Closer to the Heart of God," and right now you're leading a group of guys through this book. But as we've been discussing its content and some of the key themes that are in it, I just got thinking and said, I think some of these I just think they'd be helpful to talk through. So tonight specifically, there's a chapter in there which the chapter title, you got to dig into it a little bit because it's like an interesting title. We're talking about less wild lovers tonight. So let's just at the outset, let's just unpack this idea of what this chapter dives into specifically, but that this general theme, because I feel like we have frequent conversations about, you call it less wild lovers, or you could call it about these other distractions, addictions, misplaced loves and attentions that we give. So Sebastiano, let's go on a little bit of a dive here to what is it that we allow our heart to be captured by in life, and how does it how does it affect us? How our relationships with one another, a transparency and realness with one another, and then also these kind of masks that I think we put on in life as life kind of unfolds. So how does this work? What is the human experience like with the less wild lovers?
And I would have to say the book is something that we're using now at church, but I picked up the book 20 years ago, 15 years ago, as I was trying to work through my own stuff. And it was recommended to me, and I've read it. Now I'm on the third time go around with it and working with other men. But the idea of that chapter and then the book in general is, so God created us. I'm going way, way back.
Yes.
But, so God created us to be in relationship with him, sent Jesus. This is a Christian podcast, right? So I'm going to preach a little bit here.
You go for
Absolutely.
it.
So sent Jesus to reconcile us and bring us back into relationship with him and to let us know how much he loves us. And so even the title of the book, The Sacred Romance, some dudes will look at that and think, oh, my goodness, that's
mushy.
so corny and,
yeah,
and
whatever.
mushy. I'm not going to look at that, and that's not what real men do. And that's part of the book, actually, helping us understand what real men are supposed to be like. And first and foremost, we're supposed to be lovers of Jesus, receive his love for what he did for us, and then receive it and live in it in a way that we can become whole. John 10:10 says, I've come to give you life and life more abundantly. And so I think what happens to us, for a number of reasons, we substitute that. We allow other things to come into our lives that try to bring us satisfaction, joy, peace, comfort, instead of allowing Jesus to do that for us. And when Jesus does it, it's authentic. It's the real deal. And that makes us more authentic in the way we live our lives and the way we interact with one another. But these less wild lovers, as you alluded to, are different ways. They're substitutes. They're ways of coping in a life that probably has been difficult. I don't know any person who hasn't experienced some amount of emotional, mental, physical pain. And to that degree, we try to cope and try to survive. We try to get by. And the challenge is, I think for us men who have gone through some difficult times as children, I hate to sound Freudian, but he did have a couple of things.
Yeah, he was on
I
something.
think,
Yeah.
yeah. And these childhood events of trauma, whether it's abuse of one degree or another, we're not mentally capable of reasoning and being able to work through, oh, this is why this happened.
Right.
It's not my fault or that
Right.
sort of thing. But as children, we don't have that ability. And what we do is we believe lies that we're told. I'm bad. I did something wrong. Simple name calling, verbal abuse is just as bad as physical abuse. So your parent or a significant adult one day calls you stupid. That's what you believe for years, that you're stupid.
And I think this, Andy and I have talked about this before, where, I mean, there is this, I personally, like as a father, have this underlying fear that like at any moment I'm screwing my kids up by something that I've said to them, that it is a passing thought, or it is in a moment of frustration or whatever, but if nothing else, just within myself, recognizing that there are, like, words have the power to heal, and they have the power to
destroy. Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, even for those people listening right now, they're like, well, you know, I had a pretty good childhood. You know, my parents didn't beat me. You know, they didn't. You know, I mean, we hear these, obviously, the extreme cases of like, yeah, you know, parents were arrested for child abuse and, you know, chaining their kids to the radiator in the room, or, you know, these terrible things like this.
Mm-hmm.
And we go, well, I didn't have anything like that. And yet, you know, the reality is that there are things said, and then those things are just sort of swept under the rug, or we move on from them, but they exist, they sort of exist, they plant themselves there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I like, even within myself, with even going into adulthood, like, it was a couple of years ago, I was at a coaching event, and this really just an amazing guy, Hendry Coetzee. He's go on and on about his background, really interesting dude, but he's a professional coach, and he's training all of us in the kind of the art of, you know, of coaching and of direction and things like this. And but the thing is in order for us to do this well for others, we have to go through the steps ourselves. We have to kind of, you know, come clean and realize things. And I just remember, like, at the time, I wasn't, like, for some reason, I had a truth within me that was like, hey, if I exert my full personality, I will be perceived as arrogant and as a jerk. Like, Joel being Joel is unacceptable. Joel is too arrogant. Joel is too over the top. Now, when I was younger, like, Joel was too far over the top. But, like, that had stayed with me. That idea, or that whatever, had stayed with me. And I just remember there was a moment when we were working through this where he was like, and again, he's so skilled. I mean, we basically went through like 2 decades of history in about 3 minutes, where he just like got right to the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And he just looked at me. He just said, dude, he said it more strongly than this, but he said, dude, you're a Viking. And it was like, it just set me back in my chair. And I had this narrative that was going on in my life.
Mm-hmm.
He named something, called something out in me, and there was a significant shift. But it was words, but it wasn't just words.
Mm-hmm.
So that just is my personal example to say, like, I even in my adulthood, I mean, I was 33 years old when that happened, and like all of a sudden I'm like, I've been living under something here, you know, not aware. But it just took someone who I respected to say something very intentional to me, to actually begin to correct course.
To call that out and make you see it.
Yeah. So,
like you said, sometimes we come from wonderful homes, but it's not the home life then. Maybe it's in school.
Right.
Maybe it's peers at school. Maybe it's a life event when you started working. But somewhere, somehow you've believed this lie that there's something wrong with you. I'm not fully the person that I should be. Because human nature, too, I think we compete and we compare. And so if I'm not like so-and-so, if I'm not like that successful person, then there must be something wrong with me. I mean, media is terrible in terms
Yeah.
of giving us the impression of how we should live and what we should look like, clothes we should wear, and what we should eat, and then what we do is we stuff that so we pretend or we're superficial, and no one knows what's really going on in my life. No one really knows how insecure I might be. No one really knows the addiction that I might be struggling with, and no one is going to know.
Right.
And there's a number of reasons why we are superficial. I mean, I think first of all, the culture. I remember growing up watching this movie called The Magnificent Seven, and it's about these 7 cowboys. It was a Western, and they go into this town, and the town is corrupt, and there's like 100 bad guys in the town, but these seven on their own are able to correct things and save the rest of the town. But there's a song that was played, unfortunately, during the 70s for a cigarette.
Oh, okay.
Marlboro
Yes.
is a cigarette, and bum bum ba bum bum
Bum,
ba bum
bum,
bum
bum,
ba
bum.
bum
Yeah.
bum
Mhm.
bum ba
Yep,
bum,
yep.
and these guys are riding in on their horses like every little boy wants to be
Right.
strong and be able to resolve issues on their own and not tell anybody that something wrong, but just take it and resolve it and move forward. So one little example, I think, of how the culture tells us, even if you do have something, you don't tell anybody about it. You take it by the scruff of the neck and you take care of the problem yourself. That's one of the lies,
Mm-hmm.
because we don't really resolve the issue.
Yeah.
It gets buried or it gets projected in a different way, and it's still there with us.
Well, and I think even just as a culture, we're told as men, you can't cry, you can't be emotional, and so for us, we stuff those things and put on this front of, we're big and we're bad, because like you
Right.
said, everyone wants to do that, and then everyone's told, that's what a real man is, and so that's where you start believing these lies, that people are telling you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're even into a place now. I mean, like, even as I sit here, I get a little, I don't know what the word is. I feel a little bit cringy of, like, because we are talking about some traditional traits of manhood and masculinity and these sort of things,
Right.
and there's a lot of confusion about that. We're now, we're throwing out toxic masculinity terminology and phrase, where it's even now it's like, man, I'm just like, I'm now becoming self-conscious about, which I think is a struggle, self-conscious about even asking the question, what does it mean to be an authentic man? What does it mean to be, because yes, I do hold the perspective that there are uniquenesses to women and uniquenesses to men, and that is a difference. That is a God-given difference, as it reflects his identity
absolutely.
and who he is. So, that being said, I just, in trying to figure out, there just seems to be, because I recognize it within myself, a lot of confusion about what it would look like for men to be authentic with each other. Because, I mean, that's a big, I was just talking with another pastor friend of mine, a mutual friend, all of us would know him, and the other day, and he just said he's in a different area of ministry right now, but he's like men's ministry. He's like, I just feel like there is just this gaping hole need to be able to go to deeper places in within the hearts of men, because, and I experience it all the time. And for those of you listening, if you're in my church, we'll just say I'm not talking about you, but like going to important, deep spiritual places with men, just at times, man, it feels like such a labor. It feels like we've just got to, like, take baby steps with baby steps. And again, I'm painting with a broad brush here. Whereas the women's Bible study meeting down the hall, like 2 times in, like they've shared life story. So I recognize there are some gender differences there.
Mhm.
We could say that, but there is just this I don't know. There are these layers, this kind of this hardness to that I experience so often. And I'd like to say that I experience it less within the church. I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm not sure that's the reality, though.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Well, I think the church though it should be a place where men and women, anyone would feel comfortable to be vulnerable and open and honest and say, please, help me, please help me to grow in my faith, please help me with these issues. Somehow, and yeah, I don't have the answer, but somehow we've projected church to be a place where you have it all together.
Right.
And if you dare would, we have opportunities the way our services are structured. You can come forward if you want prayer for something, stand up, raise your hand. Somehow there's this demonstration that I'm vulnerable and I need your help. Forget it.
Yeah.
I mean, because no one else, we look around, and I grew up in the church my whole life, and even when they had the invitation to accept Jesus, you're kind of looking around, one eye open. Are my other friends doing this? It's that whole peer pressure.
Yeah.
And it's not just as adolescents.
No.
I think peer pressure is with us as adults, as men. I mean, we want to be accepted. We want to be part of the group. But there's a lot of hurting men out there. I would even say pastors.
Yeah.
As we've done and read studies, how many pastors are struggling with different types of addictions, mental illness, emotional disturbances.
And we've lost a lot of even to suicide this past year. I think I've got 3 names right off the top of my head of pastors we've lost to suicide in this past year. That were, I mean, and I'm not offering any simple solution. I'm just saying that there was these people were in the center of thriving ministry leadership, and they were sinking themselves. And even there, they were not like, you would think they're in that role, like, oh man, what a great opportunity. Like, they would clearly be in relationship with other people and would have close support and things like that. And many people, they just, like, they themselves were cut off somehow, or didn't see a way out.
Well, and I think I'm not a professional pastor. I'm not,
vocational,
whatever that is.
Yeah.
But I think that, especially like, you're held to a higher standard. Like, people in the church are holding you. You have this perception that you people don't want to see you as a real person. That they want to see you as pastor who gets up and has it all together. And I think that's false. I think coming from the other side, that's not true. I don't think we hold you to that standard. But at the same time, I think that I could completely see why, as a pastor, you hold yourself to that standard where you're like, I can't let people know who I actually am, especially people in your church, because you're pastoring those people. You're supposed to be guiding them,
and they pay my paycheck.
Right, right. And that's why I think that's why it's super important for you guys as pastors and anybody else who's listening who is in a vocational job to have other places, other people, other pastors that aren't necessarily in your church to be able to come together and say, hey, this is the stuff that's going on in my life.
Yeah.
I think that's a key. That is the key, I think, in terms of having at least one or two other people that you can be open with and honest and vulnerable. And vulnerable, we don't mean that you start crying and whimpering. If you cry, that's fine too. But I mean, vulnerable means that you're completely honest with yourself and with at least one other person to say, this is what's going on in my life. My life isn't perfect.
Right.
I don't have everything together. I struggle in my marriage. I struggle as a parent. I struggle as a pastor. And to cope, I've gotten involved and done some things that aren't healthy and less wilders, we can call them, addictions. But it's prevalent, and it's something that we have to find a way to make people feel safe enough to at least come forward and acknowledge, I need help. And sometimes, like you said in the beginning, Joel, it could be something severe where there's been abuse and the addictions are, there's correlation. The more painful your situation is, typically the greater involved you are in trying to find ways of coping. And so the addiction might be something that drinking, drugs, pornography is huge for men. Whatever you want to believe, statistically, 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10.
Right.
Yeah, and those are just ways of anesthetizing our struggle and our pain that we're going through. If we could find one person. When I worked at Teen Challenge, I remember what they used to call this when someone would finally confess and say, yeah, I'm alcoholic, I'm a drug addict, they would use the term, the monkey's off my back.
Yeah.
And the idea, they would describe it as when you're living the lie, when you're hiding everything, it feels like this monkey is on your back, literally scratching, biting, you're so uncomfortable. You're using so much energy, and there's so much stress because you're in denial and you're hiding who you really are. And I'll never forget that. They'd say, oh, the monkey's off my back. I mean, there's a peace and a sense of well-being almost instantly when you're able to say, guys, this is what I have struggled with for years. And sometimes it's just, I'm a workaholic. So we say, oh, the guy works hard. There's nothing really wrong with that. It's not like he's addicted to pornography or is an alcoholic. But even those who are workaholics, it's a way of covering up for a sense of not feeling adequate. Yeah. So I need to work hard. I need to achieve. And people who are workaholics don't know even how to relax. If you have a day off, you're like, oh, I'm just feeling so uneasy, so uncomfortable, so I need to start doing something.
Yeah.
So I know there's a lot of pastors and even other professionals out there that would be described as workaholics. It's just, again, a way of coping and covering up our pain. And I think the one I said was just one example that we got to be tough, we got to be hard. Andy, you alluded to it as well. But I think another one that we hide behind is, if anyone ever found out what I'm struggling with, that would be the end of the relationship. Those people would abandon me, if not reject me. And then there's a fear of just natural consequences. If they find out at work, I'm done, I'll be fired. And so we believe all these lies that we have to hide what's really going on in our lives, because if people find out, if work finds out, if the church finds out, my spouse finds out, for parents, especially dads, if my kids find out that I'm not Superman, that's it, our relationship is over. The best thing we can do for our kids as dads is show them how human we are, and how we can cope with our mistakes in ways that are healthy and appropriate, as opposed to unhealthy and inappropriate ways.
What would you say is if you're going through life and there's just a chronic lack of transparency in your life, what are the long-term spiritual effects of that? Of living in that way? Where does that take you?
Yeah, I think what happens is it's a way of coping that seems all right, that seems like I'm getting by, but what you're really doing is you're shutting the door on not only people, but then on your relationship with Jesus.
Yeah.
Your spiritual relationship begins to suffer because you're not fully engaged and what you could be doing as a Christian in terms of your lifestyle. So, yes, we're covering up, we're shut down, we're not letting anybody in, but that also includes the Lord in terms of the spiritual discipline. So you might even be applying and practicing some of the spiritual disciplines. And if you are, and you're able to say, I'm praying every day, or I'm reading my Bible every day, but I'm just not getting anything.
Yep. And that's what you're referring to as discipline. So we typically talk about the traditional ones, prayer, reading of scripture, some fasting. We go on down the road, but typically those are kind of the ones that kind of come to mind quickly.
And when a person will say, I've been doing these and I'm just not getting anything out of it, I don't seem to feel or experience God's presence, that can be a sign, unless 1%, and we won't get into this, but the term the dark night of the soul.
Right.
Other than that, it's typically a sign of that you're shut down.
Yep.
So you're shut down because you don't want anyone to know who you are, and a consequence of that is you're shutting out what the Lord wants to do in our lives.
In I guess in my experience, what starts happening is that like men lose the vocabulary to talk about spiritual things.
Mm-hmm.
Like as they close down, even the ability to give voice to
Right.
what they feel, there's kind of a numbness that sets in there. And then, because quite honestly, we have to have a spiritual vocabulary, so to speak, to be able to name the things that are going on and to name our way out of and towards something different.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you're not when you're not paying attention to your heart over a period of time, there is this, I mean, there's kind of this, like, you become this shell of a person that can't really speak about their inner life. I mean, they don't have words for it. And I think, like, when it comes to like living authentically with other people, that it's like a spiritual muscle basically that has to be exercised.
Because the more you exercise that,
Yeah.
it's stronger it's gonna get.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I've felt those times personally where I'm like, I have not had like right now Andy and I are trying to get our group of men that we've done just so much life with over the last decade and a half and going on 15 years.
Mm.
And we're trying to get together. We're all in that busy multiple young kids stage of life. But there is a number one, just a general catharsis to sitting down. But like men, I want you to hear this. Like the freedom that lies in being able to sit with people who really do know you, and who can really, and where you can say exactly what's going on. Like you can name everything, like everything down to the final degree of where your marriage is not doing well, where you're fearing about how you're raising your kids, where there are maybe it's like, hey, we're not handling finances well, whatever that might be, where you can be in that space, be totally transparent, and not be judged for it. Like therein lies freedom,
Mm-hmm.
I think.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we can experience that from people that we trust, especially people that are on a similar faith journey to us, that are, for in this case, these men that are also following after Jesus, as I am, we begin to maybe believe that if they won't judge me and shame me, maybe God, who is even greater than they are, can also respond the same way. And the thing that, and yet God can do a thing that they can't do, and that is forgive me.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Ultimately.
Let's talk a little bit though about how you start that journey with those people, because obviously we talked about, as men, as dudes, we're kind of got this wall up and we don't want anyone to know. So how do you even go about starting, like sitting down and saying, hey, Joel, this is the junk that I deal with? I mean, obviously, we as men have friends, but to take it to that next level, that's a hard thing to do. So how do we do that?
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think if we start with the truth that's in Scripture, and so we have a model in Jesus. I love the way Jesus modeled not only authenticity, but he also modeled it in a way that you can't be that way with everybody you meet.
Yeah.
It's just not humanly possible. We're not wired that way. But so in Jesus, we see 3 different stories in the gospel where he has the 12, but then he brings the 3,
Right.
Peter, James, and John, into these more intimate settings. And in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he's about to acknowledge to the Father, okay, we'll do this. I'm going to give up my life. I'm going to be crucified. I'm going to be killed. And it says in the stories there that he's crying so deeply that he's shedding blood. I mean, it's
right.
And who's there? I mean, that's one of the most vulnerable descriptions I've heard of a human being. Just sobbing and just crying, expressing their pain and their fear. And there's Peter, James, and John in a very vulnerable situation.
And if you're Jesus, if you go the way of fear of authenticity, you're like, okay, listen, I'm the Messiah here. These dudes cannot see that I'm having a moment of coming potentially unglued here.
Yeah.
and yet he does, and they still see fit to follow him, number one, and then also write about him in a way that others could follow as well.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, they wrote
Yeah.
that story. They wrote
Yeah.
that piece about him. And then the other story I like is when he is on the Mount of Transfiguration, they call it.
Oh, yes.
Again, he brings the 12, and then he says to the 9, you guys wait here. Peter, James, and John, come with me.
Yep. This is Luke 9 is a really great account of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then he is transfigured into the Holy One.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's like, to me, that's a sign of being completely open. Here's who I really am,
Right.
guys. You see me here.
Yeah.
Now I'm giving you another level of who I really am.
Yeah.
And then I love, Peter, hey, man, let's just hang out here. Can we just build a little
Because he
tent?
did because he didn't know what else to say, which is a
Right.
great.
Yeah.
Let's build you a hut.
James and John are like,
Yeah.
And so I think Jesus models for us the importance if you can find one or two, maybe three other guys that you can trust and be completely open
Yeah.
and honest with. How does that happen? It happens very carefully. It happens slowly. It happens with great risk. But it needs to happen. I wish I could say there's another way around it.
You will have to. There will be some failure in this process. I think this is, by the way, if you're a person that's got a hurting heart, this is the tough part, right? Because you've got to walk in, you've got to step out on the limb.
Well, you've probably been hurt.
Yes,
Because
Right.
someone's
and so
Yeah.
there's believe me, the enemy wants in all ways possible to keep you away from other people that could help you find wholeness, right? So there is there's a lot of conversation you can have within your own heart that just says, like, I cannot trust people with this
Right.
stuff because
It's like those lies that we believe that I said a few minutes ago. If anyone else finds out about me, that's it. I'm
Yeah.
done.
done.
However superficial our relationship might be, it'll
Right.
be over.
And if you're working on trust here, this is the simple truth about trusting people. If you want to learn to trust people, trust them.
Right. Yeah, and like you said, I think it's going to become a slow process because even sometimes the people you think you can trust, you can't necessarily trust. And
True.
yeah, I think it's one of those things you just be vulnerable and say, hey, we've done a lot. I mean, for me, this is how it's worked. It's like we've done a lot of life together.
Right.
We've gone through a lot of stuff, and so I've been able to say, hey, Joel, hey, Matt, Brian, you guys can hold me accountable for these things. This is what I'm dealing with. I trust that you're not going to run and tell it to everybody because I've been through stuff with you.
Right.
And so that's where I started. Is it's kind of like, hey, we've shared life together. I've experienced this in your life, and you've experienced this in my life. I feel like I can trust you with the fact that I'm, I can hold you accountable, or I can have you hold me accountable with the stuff that
Right.
is hard for me to talk about with everybody.
But you do have to live life with other people, and that's the thing. I've got some people in mind in my own life where they are kind of an island unto themselves in many ways, and it makes it incredibly difficult for them to engage in authentic community because if you don't make yourself known. If you have to put yourself out there to make yourself known, and that there is absolutely risk. There's absolutely risk involved with that, but the reward that's the thing.
Yes.
I can't say loud enough. It's like the reward so far outweighs the risk, and we take. And the thing is, friends, the risk that you might be taking right now. To try to soothe this disquiet in your soul, there is ultimately, at the end of the day, there is only one for sure outcome for all of this, is that it will get deeper and it will get darker and it will get lonelier. And as you walk into these as it gets darker, it's going to feel less and less like there's a way out. And that's why I think for some, for these dearly beloved pastors and spiritual leaders who think about this. They had, put their faith in Jesus. They had said, Jesus, my life is in his hands. And yet something was able to grab hold of their heart in such a way where not even that truth could bring them out of ultimately of their life here on earth ending. And so I mean, this is real stuff. The levels of importance of this, I mean, this is why we're talking about it, is because it's not something to be played with. It can just feel like, I know this, like you're just getting by and you're doing what's necessary to get by in this life, and maybe you've come from a rough family position, maybe things at work have been tough, maybe marriage is tough, whatever, and if I'm just doing this so that I don't completely fall apart, let me just absolutely guarantee you that it will absolutely fall apart eventually.
Mm-hmm.
It might be a decade from now. It might be, I mean, Sebastiano and I have talked about how many high-profile Christian leaders, after decades of service in the church, high-profile service in the church, international acclaim and books published and sermons preached and so on and so forth, it turns out that it is kind of a facade, or it is just a one narrative that underneath all of that, it's just those individuals are crumbling on the inside, and they're engaging in all kinds of behaviors that are,
And almost to a person, there's always that same relational, it's a lack of relational, there isn't one person who has held them accountable or who's aware of who they are and how they live their lives. There is a counseling ministry in Akron, Ohio called Emerge Ministries. And every year for the last 20 years, statistically, they have hundreds, maybe 400 or 500 pastors, missionaries, Christian leaders who come in for counseling because they've been involved in inappropriate behavior. Mm-hmm. And the most common theme is that they didn't have a person in their life who would hold them accountable. They didn't have someone in their lives that knew everything about them. Yeah. And one of the statistics is that they didn't have a close friend they felt they can confide in.
Right.
And this idea that you're hiding things, that you're trying to live this life, meanwhile you have the secret life. If you could find one person, just one other person that you could be completely open and honest with, and like we said, if you can start by saying, when I was 10 years old, I stole candy. Mm-hmm. So we start in kind of in a safe.
Right.
We did that in our Bible study. I asked the men to say, all right, so tonight we're going to confess one of the worst things we've ever did in their eyes. And then I said, by the way, it had to happen before you were 10 years old.
Thank goodness. Okay.
But yeah, joking aside, maybe you start that way.
Yeah.
Hey, when I was a kid, this is what I struggled with. And if you can trust the person, if there isn't a judgmental response, if there isn't a look like, oh my goodness, if there's compassion instead, and if there's acceptance, then we can move forward and begin to be completely. And like you said, both of you said, I think there's something freeing. I think there's something naturally healthy about being open and honest, because that's how we were created, to be loved and to be known, and to love and to know is why God created us. This mutual relationship. And as dads, I think, not only for yourself, but what an example that you can set for your kids. Your children learn by modeling. I learned some great behaviors from my dad, but I also learned some things I'm trying not to repeat. But I mean, it's not just about us as individuals. We influence the lives that are in our homes. And I would say it's never too late, Dad. Whether you're 30 and your kids are still at home, or whether you're 60, you still have conversation with your kids. And maybe one of the best things you can do if you're right now apart and there isn't a relationship is make the call and just say, I'm sorry. That would go volumes for a son or a daughter to receive that from a father who's never said that before. I have an illustration. I don't know. We could send this.
We'll put it in our show notes.
We'll make the diagram.
We'll make the diagram in the show notes. Okay. So,
but there's this bullseye real quick. So in the center, of course, is God, and then The next layer outside is our true or authentic self. And then in the very outside is the false self or the public self. And that's who we present. That's who we let people in. And then I've got these lines, and Joel and Andy, they can see it. So as the lines move in, they move closer together. So you're not only getting closer together to another person, but you're moving closer to God at the same time.
Yep.
And I believe in the spiritual disciplines of silence and solitude, but I think and I believe that you've got to be in relationships with others if you're fully going to grow and mature into all that God has called you to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I'm I guess I'm just super sensitive these days too. I mean, you talked to talk about, yes, definitely our relationship with each other as men and how we're going to better places and more authentic places with each other. The thing I'm trying to figure out, maybe Andy, you've got the older child, maybe you've got the magic insight on this, is expressing authenticity with my children, with my young children. And because you said it, I mean, I got to get better at saying I'm sorry to my kids. I know that because there's times where we'll go through life, we'll go through something, our daily whatever, and it's like I didn't handle that well. I'll acknowledge that within myself, but then I won't go back to my kid. Mostly because if I tell my 10-year-old, hey man, I know they did that thing earlier, and Dad should not have done that, or I should have said this instead, or whatever. He'll be, okay, Dad, thanks. It's like it can come across like a bigger deal to me. But
let me say this. Publicly, he might say, yeah, okay, Dad.
Sure.
But you have no idea
right.
subconsciously how that's been tucked away in
Right.
the heart and in the mind.
And yet I'm modeling it to him, right?
Absolutely.
That sort of behavior is going to be commonplace, where even though I'm the father, I'm the authority, I'm the whatever, more experience, more now, whatever, that I am never above offering myself up to say, I wasn't as I should be. I was not at my best at that moment. I was not as I should be before you. And so I'm in a way, I'm submitting myself to this greater desire for authenticity, and saying that that's going to be the thing that wins out at the end of the day. And dads, maybe you've got something you just need to tell. I don't care what age your kid is. Maybe you've got something that you just need to say, hey, didn't handle it right. Didn't do it right. I missed that one.
And I think it's important to do that in your marriage too, in front of your kids, like do that and show them.
Yeah,
hey,
I suck at that big time.
Like you're, me and your mom had this argument, and but I'm sorry. Like you apologize and say that you're wrong, and I think that speaks volumes to them also
That's
too.
huge. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Jackie and I usually argue in front of our kids about arguing with our kids. It's a weird.
You're the good cop. She's the bad cop, or vice versa.
We don't, and I get it. Like we don't always agree at how we. It's easy, I guess, to disagree with each other about how we're handling a situation with our kids. I mean, that's it. But we have that disagreement in front of them, which is not, it's not ideal. It's not how I'd like to model that better. Again, the modeling thing. I mean, even if kids can't give exact language to what they're seeing, they do know how it makes them feel. They do have, I mean, one of my children, Jackie and I have been in an argument before, but it's like one that's gone on longer or whatever. And all of a sudden you're realizing okay, two of my children are crying right now.
Mm-hmm.
And why are they're having emotions about the fact that we're arguing, through something. And so it's like, that's where you get I hope I'm not screwing my kids up. I do not want this to be the sum total of what they remember of their childhood. But I can literally, from my own childhood, I can literally remember the two bad fights my parents had, yelling at us in front of literally two, in a lot of years. And so I'm just going to assume there were a lot of ones that I was not privy to and I was not aware of, but I just make note of like those things are vivid. Like I have the imagery in my mind. I can remember the place. I can remember
the smell,
the whole thing, and it's just like those are important things to realize. Like our children are definitely paying attention to how we are living authentically or inauthentically.
Well, as we're talking about modeling, one thing that comes to mind that we've experienced in our home is the emotional response to the situation needs to be appropriate. So if something, the kids tease me because we might be watching something, or we've gone to a movie, we watch something, and they say, "Okay, Dad's going to cry now," and I've teased them. Real men cry,
Yeah,
but
right.
when there's a situation where a puppy dies or
always the puppy.
a relationship ends that you wish they just would have gotten together, tears well up,
Right.
or and they tease, but again, inside you've set a standard for subconsciously down the road. It'll be conscious for them to say, "Oh." They're not going to say, it's very unlikely they'll say, "Oh, yeah, I remember 10 years ago when we watched this movie and my dad cried, so it's okay for me to cry."
Right.
But that's what's happening in your mind, in your heart. And so appropriate responses to events is also an important way to model for kids how to be authentic. With your friends, with our peers.
Yeah.
So when we're at a movie, we're sitting around and we're talking.
Yeah.
How many of us try to be authentic and then you get teased or it's a joke? And
we've Andy and I have been on at least one or two marriage retreats where
with your spouses,
with us,
not together,
but we did one a few years back where it was four of us couples or whatever, and I just remember like you just had a sense it was going somewhere, and it's like by the end it's like, okay, now 8 people are going to sit in this room and cry together, and but again, we had that experience together, and so now I know, that's a safe thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also remembering now, so I will never forget sitting in my dad's lap. We're watching the Pistol Pete Maravich. Good old Pistol Pete, right? We're watching. It's like it's a movie about him, and it's like a drama. It's not like a documentary, but it's like a biopic or whatever they would call it. And there's what is it? There's this moment. Pistol Pete is having like overcoming some adversities in the gym. He spends hours and hours in the gym, and what is it? His dad walks into the gym and gives him this basically this like doing hard things is worth it kind of discussion or whatever. And first time ever, I can literally remember the tears coming down my dad's face. He's like, and I'm like, I tried to ask him like, "Dad, what did he?" And my dad's so choked up he can't like talk to me or whatever. And I just and it was just like, but see, to the point, I remember that vividly. Like that was okay for my father to be moved by something like that, a conversation between a father and son, and I'm having multiple memories this evening of like, yes, in my mind I didn't like as a young child like reason through like, oh, it is okay to da da da, but the emotional experience did lead to some understandings,
right.
Which is, I don't know, maybe that's why I grew up to be a pastor and a counselor. Is I had all these I need to let people know it's okay to I don't know, express their emotion, empathy, sympathy, things,
compassion.
Yeah.
This is a very good conversation, guys, and I think we could probably go on for hours.
Hours and hours.
But yeah, like if you guys have any feedback about this, we would love to hear your perspective, how you deal with being authentic, and being real with the people around you. What's worked for you? What's not worked for you? How do you go about creating these groups, these friendships that you can be real with?
What scares you? What's keeping you from it? Love to hear more about that too. Again, I mean, our purpose in this show is just to have this kind of organic, authentic conversation around it. Is to say, it is possible. We ourselves have experienced it. It did not happen overnight. It was it was work, and which is, by the way, we haven't actually said. I mean, maybe overtly to say you will have to work at this. Anything
Exactly.
worth doing, it's a spiritual labor, but it's also just the physical thing of like, hey, like Andy and I are trying right now. Like, hey, we are actually, we've talked online, but we're actually going to have to like
Get together.
We're going to have to do this. We're going to find a time.
Right.
It's going to be a work, a work in progress. So, that's what we kind of want to inspire in all of you, or to get you guys thinking about it if you haven't. And again, maybe like wherever you are spiritually, maybe you're like, I'm not really, I don't even know about the whole Jesus thing or whatever. Let me just tell you, pure, plain, and simple, whether or not you're even at a place to be able to think about this at a deeper spiritual level, human being. I mean, I can even say it from a scientific standpoint. Human beings need relationship with each other, and they need safe places and authentic places. I don't care what your faith background is, and all of that. Those are important things. And we just fundamentally believe that if you are in relationships where you can be authentic, you can be your real self, you can, yes, confess things to each other, you can work through things with each other, you're going to be a better dude, you're going to be a better dad. And that's what we're here. That's what we're here to encourage, ultimately. And we don't claim to be the experts on it entirely, but we've had some experiences. We think our experience is worth sharing to encourage you guys. So that's our goal. So we're just grateful that you guys tuned in, listened up. We want to say, as always, to Dr. Sebastiano, thank you.
Thank you for the privilege of being here.
We're going to schedule his third interview here, ongoing. Our armchair expert. So Andy, it's been another great one.
It has. We want to remind you guys to make sure that you check us out on Facebook and Instagram, Twitter even. Go ahead and check out our website, and that's going to be dudesanddads@gmail.com. And dudesanddads.podcast.com. That was our email address.
Yes, thank you.
All these things to remember. Can't remember them all. But we want to thank also our Patreon supporters. If you want to check us out and help support the show too, you can go to dudesanddads.podcast.com/support if you want to join our wonderful Patreons.
Thank you guys so much for all the support. Keep the feedback coming, and until next time, grace and peace.